It's very nice to be here. I'll be doing this in English because my Polish is not where it should be, I guess. I could do it in Swedish, but I get the translation service would be a bit in a disadvantage then. Let's see here. Oh, that's the main page that we'll start with. Okay, so who am I? I'm Niklas, obviously from Sweden, as I mentioned. I've been in the industry for almost 30 years now. I started out by doing computer science at Uppsala University, and then went into the IT industry, I would say. First as a programmer, and then slowly moving, to more management positions. But I mean, mainly I worked with information security and IT security. I've done work at the big tech companies like Microsoft and Adobe. And I've also been at the National Police and General Attorney in Sweden. And about 10 years ago, I actually moved over to the industrial side of things. I got an assignment at ABB, kind of big Swedish company working with the industrial control systems and so on. And then almost 10 years ago, I joined Westermo, which is a company that we manufacture routers and switches for industrial use. So what are we here for today? Yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit about, say, as the title says here, when the Internet of Things become the Internet of Targets. But we'll start out by looking at kind of your security posture and what that actually means, and kind of how you need to rethink that going forward when you work with security. And then, at the end, I'm going to touch upon a couple of things that I think that are very important that you could actually start working with right now that might be a bit, I wouldn't say forgotten, but kind of, there is always a bit much discussion about technology and kind of save the day with, installing a new firewall or whatever, but I have a bit of a different take on that. We already discussed the purpose. Security posture. So this is just one representation. The key idea here is to say that it's more of a continuous process than something that you do as a one-off. I usually see it as more kind of protect, detect, respond. It's easy to remember, but protect is kind of the tech part where you start your system, and then obviously you need to work with your posture. I'll come back to this one later on in the presentation and see how you could actually work with different phases in this one. But I mean, the Internet of Things, it's been a term used for several years now, and no one really defines it really well. There's just a lot of connected devices. This is just a number. I looked at several estimates because there's no one actually that knows how many connected devices there are on the Internet. I mean, 14.4 billion, meaning that you will have 2 connected devices for every person on the planet. And this is projected to increase to about, say, the estimate was 30 million by 2030. And this will have an impact on the industrial control systems and the SCADA systems and so on, because you will get more connected devices. You will probably, I mean, right now, I don't know how big systems you have. Maybe you have 100 devices in your system. You have one remote access line coming in. In 5-10 years, you might have 1,000 units or 2,000 units, and they will be connecting to the Internet. So that's going to pose a very big challenge when it comes to working with industrial control systems. So what are the threats out there? These are just, kind of a list of different types of attacks or things that could happen. Sidechannel attacks, ransomware, quite high on the target. We had ABB was targeted recently, and there's always that. You have the unencrypted data, obviously, convergence. On this conference, there's been a lot of talk about the IT-OT convergence. Obviously, that's going to happen. Maybe not as you thought it would be like a year ago, but we are using the same technology. So there is no kind of running away for the SCADA systems. Sidechannel attacks, what's that? I mean, in the IoT world, that's actually what you maybe should worry about. A sidechannel attack is where you use a function that is designed and implemented and works. There's no vulnerability here that you're exploiting. You're just using the data that is collecting by a feature or so on. Say, a good example could be your cell phone. You have In a cell phone, they did a study at a university. I mean, you have a motion sensor in your cell phone that monitors when you move it around. It's for everything. And the studies show that by getting that data, when you're entering your PIN code or drawing the pattern you have to unlock your phone, you could actually, within like 4, 5, 6 tries, actually get the PIN code or the sequence that you're drawing by having the motion sensor data. Nothing else. You're just collecting that data. And then they did a study. They went out on the Google store and looked at the apps. So they took 88,000 apps, and they checked, okay, about 30,000 of them had the capability of getting that data. Obviously, most of those apps were not, using it for, getting your PIN code or whatever, but their data could leak to anyone else. So that's a side-channel attack. And the reason why I'm talking about that is the increase of side-channel attacks will increase when you have a lot more connected devices. So you will have a lot more data floating around that you will not have control over. Another example, this is a pacemaker. You probably know what it is. The first actually successful surgically implanted pacemaker was done in Stockholm in 1958. That one was a Swedish invention. There were several other works that had been done both in Germany and the US at the time. I imagine that no one back then actually thought about that this could actually be a device that you could attack in the future. I mean, this is long before internet was invented. But this is an IoT device today. It's connected in some way. And we'll come back to that one a bit later in the presentation. But this is just to show that basically every little device that you buy will be connected in the future in one way or the other. And this is why you have to rethink your posture when working with that. But before we go into the posture, we could actually look a bit about when you look at incidents and what actually happens when you're running. I'm working as a CISO, so that's basically what I do all day. I look at the incidents and I look at risks. So this pyramid kind of shows, there's been some discussion here at the conference about this, that you look at the targeted attacks, and they say, oh, it's only been, I think it was the first presentation, you had a list to say, oh, 30, documented targeted attacks on, IoT systems or OT systems. And that's the way it is. There are very few of those documented. It doesn't mean we can stop worrying about them, but if you're running a SCADA system, the things that you worry about daily and that kind of affects your day-to-day work, it's kind of the mistakes that are made, or the kind of the malice, meaning like you have an employee that is making a shortcut in the process. He's like, this is cumbersome, I don't have time for that. And then they finally kind of shortcut, try to make it more, easy way for the work, and then they make a mistake. And that brings down availability of your system, which is kind of the key. I mean, my background within the IT sector, then kind of confidentiality and integrity was the key. You were protecting that, so you could always cut off the system if there was, an incident or a breach or something. But in a SCADA system, you can't do that because availability is everything. So the mistakes have a really big impact on your operations. And for the higher management and business side of things, then you start losing money. So that's why I would say the numbers on the side, I wouldn't say it's 100 to 1. It might be even more for mistakes, from the way I see it. The key element here is to think, you need to really think about this. I mean, the password reuse, for instance. You get into operations, you come to a factory, and you go out into operations, you see those post-it notes with all the passwords, and you try to implement some security feature, you want to have them multi-factor authentication, and they go like, but no, my employees, they don't have a phone, they kind of, they can't do that challenge, there's no way. And then you have the post-it note with the password, and that's a reuse. That's a really, a challenge actually in operations. So when you kind of rethink and work with your security posture, you really need to really look at that. That is actually what you're protecting here. You're working against the mistakes, the abuse, and the simple things. But sometimes the targeted attacks will come along, and you need to be prepared for that as well. So, coming back to a bit of your security posture, there are a few key elements. There is a lot of discussion about technology here. I mean, when I look at the vendors, I mean, Westermo is included in that. We sell technology. And most of the vendors that are showing stuff here, they do the same. But for me, when it comes to security posture, when you're working, it's kind of the visibility. If you don't know what you have, like the asset management, if you don't know what you have in your network, there is no way you could actually be efficient in your security work. And to be efficient, you need people, because someone needs to take action. You can have any intrusion detection system, any logging whatsoever, but if there isn't a person actually looking at that data, there won't be any action. Because as it's been mentioned previously as well, intrusion prevention systems, not really feasible in a SCADA world, because you don't want to have those interruptions. It might be okay in the IT world that you have a prevention. Okay, this connection is opening, close it. But if you do that in ICS system, it might take down your whole operation. So you need the people. And security is not something that you can buy. Obviously, you know that. So it takes time and re-evaluation. And that brings me actually to kind of the three things that I can switch to that one. Kind of all good things are three activities that you should start with right away. When I kind of entered the IT industry back in late 90s, Microsoft took on a threat modeling model called Stride. So they've been working with that for like 20 years. It's still out there. There are a lot of different ways of doing threat modeling. When I joined kind of the industrial side of things 10 years ago or so, then threat modeling actually came up as one of the key things that you should work with. But it's been a bit forgotten, I think. The key element of working with threat modeling is that you identify your risks. And no one knows your installation better than you do. So there is no company, no vendor in the world that can come to you and say, okay, this solution will fix all your problems, because it doesn't work that way, because you will have your own risks. And the thing with IoT then is when you get more and more devices installed, all of them probably want to connect to the internet, to the cloud somewhere, then unless you're working with your threat model to identify this, that's a big risk. So that's the kind of the starting point when you're actually working. And the thing with working with risks is that it's easier to actually present it to the upper management. So if you want to get an investment in security, you cannot go to them and talk about technology, because they're not really interested. They're interested in the business and kind of the output from the factory or whatever. So they can generate revenue for you. But they are really used to talking about risks. And when you do this threat modeling, identify your risk, put a number to it. A dollar number, monetary number. So if this risk realizes, you will have this impact. Otherwise, they will never understand you. That's kind of the key element of threat modeling, I would say here. But then, even if you have identified the risk, I wouldn't say it's a pen and paper exercise yet, but it's sort of that. So then you need to start probing your risks. Maybe the high-profile ones. Start with penetration testing. You can hire people doing that. You can set up your own team. Build your expertise in that. That's how you probe and evaluate your risks. Especially the ones that you identify in the first phase, to being the high ones. Really work with those. Start probing them. And then, obviously, when you're having risks, you need to start closing the risks. I call it vulnerability management here. I think it's very different, actually, from, say, patch management. Patch management for me is, installing a new firmware with the updates. We had the previous presentation talking about the SBOMs, and, I didn't fully understand it because I didn't have the translation, but I'm fairly into the SBOM world, and you have the CVEs, and you have all that in open source that you need to patch. So if there's vulnerability, you can exploit it, and then you get the patch, you get a new set of firmware, and you install that one. That's patch management for me. Vulnerability management is, one level up, because there's a lot of things you can do without patching. So start looking at the things that comes in the 62443 standard, for instance, with the segmentation and segregation, and you have network-to-network protection and so on. That's kind of the technology side of that. But when it comes to your security posture, that's something you update over time. Don't stick with the flat layer 2 network forever. You need to work with that one, because you get more and more devices. You need to separate them. Well, one way of working with vulnerabilities is we have this all new set of IoT devices. We put them over in this corner, in this segment over here, which we can monitor. And you can start looking at that. One example of that, I'm coming back to the pacemaker. This was a couple of years ago, because I just want to touch upon, say, patch management in a bit more detail. There were a couple of, CVEs. I don't know how familiar you are with CVS's scoring, and you can work with that. Basically, you get a number between 1 and, you enter a lot of, data into a calculator, and then you get a number between 1 and 10. 10 being the highest, super critical, patch it right away, kind of thing. We had these, I just picked a couple of CVEs here. The one on the left is for the pacemaker, firmware update. So it's an IoT device now. You could do a man-in-the-middle attack on the firmware upgrade for the pacemaker. It did get 8 on the scoring. It's quite high. Obviously, it would take an effort, a bit more than, just spamming someone's, email server. But it's a pacemaker, so it's controlling the rhythm of your heart. So maybe you want to be extra cautious here. On the other hand, we had one that scored 8.8. Still not super high, but it's, classic phishing attack. Your Android phone. I have one in my pocket right now. Don't click the stupid link. It's like, it's obvious. But the thing is, it actually required user interaction. The first one didn't. So you were in the blind here. You didn't see anything. So obviously the attacker was, he was good at what he was doing. So if he were to hijack that process, that wasn't for anyone. But if they did, you have no clue. The firmware on your pacemaker will be, just someone else's. And when you're working with patch management, there is no way you're going to patch everything. There's way, way too many vulnerabilities out there. There's no way you can have that process. I'm talking from experience here. So here you need to make a choice. So you have to pick one of these. Okay, you have time to patch one of these. I've had this example on another conference when I was speaking, and then, then we did a show of hands and stuff, and there was a clear majority on the pacemaker side. And that's kind of obvious. So that's kind of just a touching on patch management and vulnerability management, because there might be other ways to close this one. Obviously, in this case, it might be, remove this way of being able to patch the pacemaker over the air like that. So coming back to the kind of the 3 activities, this is the key takeaway actually from this talk. Start working with these to update your posture. It's a continuous effort to do that. And I think threat modeling is a bit forgotten. If you're not into it, learn it, do it. That's how you identify your risks. That is how you will be talking to management. Penetration testing, that's kind of the probing. Sometimes it might be viewed as a kind of, tick in the box activity. Okay, yeah, we get a penetration team in. We order it from, Orange Defense or whatever company you're using. And they come in for a week or 2 and they do some probing. I would advise you to actually build your own, knowledge about this. This is a continuous effort. If you can build this into your organization, you will have a lot more for it. I mean, just doing it once a year, you know, buying it as a service, that's a good thing because you get new eyes on it. But unless you do it yourself, you will miss a lot of things. So see it as a tool when you are working with your security posture. And vulnerability management, the last point about closing the risks, it's a lot more than patch management. Patch management is vital, it's very good, but you will never be able to patch everything. So start working with other concepts, like segmentations. You know, if you identify, you know, when you do the threat modeling, you find, okay, I have these high value assets over here. They are at risk because we have a flat layer 2 network. I mean, put them over here. Might be a VLAN, might be behind a firewall, a data diode, whatever technology you identify that you need for that, go and get it. And then you need to work with it, you know, over time. That actually concludes what I think I want to really give to you today. I think we have a lot of time for questions. I didn't want to push, so if you have any thoughts, I'll be around outside here if you want to.
Right, bravo.
Okay, thank you.